We're going to talk about Newcastle United against Tottenham Hotspur today. And nothing for Spurs in the end. And it was Newcastle United's day, winning by 2-1. Barnes and Isaac with the goals, and Byrne with an own goal for Spurs. So Theo Delaney, the Spurs show, Live Goals, of course, is with us, and Steve Wraith, the Newcastle United Football Club Matters. Both with me. Gentlemen, very good evening to you.
Hi, Mark.
Hi there. And Steve, first to you. And this was important for Newcastle United today.
Yeah, we've had a rough week as Newcastle fans. The transfer window was quite disappointing for us in general. We were expecting at least one marquee signing. We didn't get one, and you add that to the general I would say disappointment, I guess, in the start of our season, not in terms of points gained, but just performances. Even in the cup game against Nottingham Forest this week, it wasn't the high pressing cavalier attitude that we're used to seeing from an Eddie Howe side, but we got through. So I guess one side of you thinks we shouldn't be complaining, but the other side of us as football fans who've been around the block a bit look at it and go, there's something amiss, something not quite right. And once again, despite there being flashes of the old Newcastle United, the Newcastle United we've seen under Eddie Howe, we got out of jail again today because Tottenham, in big parts of that game, were the better team, and the stats back that up. But ultimately, the only stats that matter when you have shots on goal, where I think Spurs had something like 20 shots on goal, Newcastle had 9 shots on goal. The only shots that really matter are the shots that end up in the back of the net. And once again, Newcastle United managed to get 2 goals today and win the game. So as a Newcastle fan, going into the international break, we've got 7 points out of the 9 mark, and we're through to the next round of the Carabao Cup with a draw, which, despite it being away from home, is a favourable one.
Well, there we are. For me as well, I think all this bits and pieces, and back now to another break with international football to come, Theo. And as well as all of that, I still think this transfer window going deep into the start of our season just gets in the way.
Yeah, it's a distraction, and they did try it once, didn't they, where they said we're going to finish our window before the action starts, and then they realised that it was completely so lopsided with the rest of Europe that it caused lots of other problems as well. So you can only really do it if the rest of Europe falls in, and that can't be done because they have staggered. Not every season starts at the same time, so it's a conundrum. I mean, I quite like the days when there wasn't a transfer window. There's just a deadline in spring, if you remember.
Yeah.
And then that was exciting because all of a sudden you pick up the newspaper in the morning. Remember that newspapers? You'd pick up a newspaper in the morning, and suddenly Trevor Francis has got to Nottingham Forest for £1 million in the middle of November or something. You think, wow,
one of the most. Well, talking about Spurs.
Yeah.
Mark Cooper, I think it was, who scored against you in a League Cup game at the Abbey Stadium. That was in the Glenn Hoddle era, and Spurs had put out a top side, and Mark scored an equalising goal. We lost it, but he moved for 100,000 about a week later, and everybody at Cambridge United was happy.
There you go, £100,000 in the bank, thanks to one goal in one high-profile encounter. Yeah, it was more exciting in those days. I'm not really sure why they introduced the transfer window. Really, if you're gonna, because as you said, it would make sense if everyone, if it stopped when everyone started playing or whatever. But it seems quite arbitrary in a way.
Well, particularly when every squad is of 40 players, Theo.
Yeah, but again, the bigger sides are going to play into, especially the Champions League, but also in the Europa League. You're going to play effectively 2 intensive competitions, and certainly in the Champions League, less so in the Europa League. Although this new format will change it a bit, I think. You can't play a second team in the Champions League. You've got to play a really, really good, strong 11. So, I mean, having said that, in the old days when Liverpool were ruling Europe, that brilliant Liverpool team, I heard you teasing Slim earlier about 42 games with 14 players, but they used to play 60 games with 14 players and win the European Cup at the same time. But I think I can only assume, well, I think we know that it's much more demanding now in terms of the human body. The game is quicker. and tougher and harder. And so you do need a lot of players if you're in a lot of competitions. Not so much if you're only playing, the domestics.
Hold it right there, boys. We've got to take a quick break. We'll be back with you both next. Who went to Newcastle United, who have had one or two disruptions in the boardroom and elsewhere, but they were pretty decent on the pitch today. Steve Wraith, NUFC Matters, up in the northeast, and Theo Delaney, the Spurs show, and of course the brilliant live goals as always. Theo, I'm going to just come back to you here on one thing for me. Is I still maintain after COVID and everything else that's gone on, and suddenly everything we've continually got going on now, if there isn't going to be a break in the next few years for some of these players, they're just going to burn out.
Well, yeah, I mean, if they play 2 games a week at this intensity. I mean, managers these days, that word intensity came in, didn't it, a few years ago? Lots of new words arrive in football, and they demand what they mean by that is absolute 100% physical commitment through every game. And the better players you want, like I was just saying, if you're in Europe as well, you want your better players in all the big games, and there aren't many small games in Europe or in the Premier League. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what the solution is. But these big squads is one way they're getting around it, because they need, they need really good players, more than one really good player for every position. So that's the only way they can provide any kind of respite at all. But even then, there's always going to be a better one in each position that you're going to want to play more often. Yeah. I don't know what the answer is, but I agree with you. It could be heading for unfortunate consequences if they don't get a hold of it.
Well, yeah, Steve, it's sort of strange that way, isn't it? I mean, you're as a club settling down under the ownership now. It now is a time again for you to move forward. Amanda Staveley and her husband no longer involved in any shape or form. Is that anything, do you think, to do with what might go on, or are you quite happy that everything is going to be settled on that side of things?
Yeah, listen, we had a summer of discontent because we had the Dan Ashworth situation hanging over the club with, Dan on gardening leave. Then Newcastle had to put in a sport director. Our first choice and second choice didn't seem to come to fruition. Newcastle seemed to be taking the time over that and brought Mitchell in very late in the window to do the business. And then, of course, in July, Amanda Staveley, the big public departure didn't help, because the public face of Newcastle United's ownership, of course, at the time was Amanda Staveley and Mirdad Guddusi from the takeover through those early 3 years. So we don't see enough of PIF. We've had 3 of the owners there today. We've had the chairman, Al Ramai, in there today, but we don't hear a great deal from them. That can be a positive and it can be a negative. Unfortunately for us, the person who's replaced Amanda, Darren Eales, I guess, has gone down a particular road, a particular avenue, which is, it's some of us probably would deem it unprofessional. We saw Mike Ashley mixing with fans in the big market and pre-match in those early days. To see Darren Eales standing at our newly built stack outside the ground, singing with supporters, is that really the image you want to create as a director of, of a football club? I think not. So I think personally, hopefully he's learned from that and he will step back and he will take note of what fans are saying on social media and just concentrate on doing things. And of course, it ties in with such a funny transfer window for us. I'm fully behind the club on not spending money on players which could ultimately, be players which we overspend money on. The Mark Gay transfer is a prime example. We all have a price, in our minds of how much a footballer's worth. And I think many of the fans suddenly starting to think, well, hold on a minute. I think we could be overpaying for a player that's perhaps been overhyped in a tournament. So look, we shouldn't be complaining. We are so far ahead of where we were a few years ago. Newcastle fans in general, we know our place. I think the biggest disappointment for us is that this takeover came through. If this takeover happened 20 years ago, Mark, we would have been doing what Man City are doing now. But it's not the case. The rules have changed. And look, a result like we got today against Tottenham,
Yeah.
you know, we seem to be a bit of a bogey team, unfortunately, for Spurs, especially at St James's Park. But that's a good result for us today. And like I say, 7 points out of 9. That's a solid start. 33 more points, and we'll be safe from relegation for another year.
Exactly. Now, Theo, Ange Ball, it never changes.
No, he always says he won't change. And so, you know, it's interesting listening to Steve. Steve's slightly concerned because they've been playing badly, but they've been getting results. So he's pleased they've been getting through. We've been playing really well. We've played 3 games, dominated really seriously dominated all 3, played some incredible attacking football. We've only ended up with 4 points. So, you know, obviously you get on social media straight after a defeat, and at least half the supporter base are out there screaming. Some of them are saying this is the end for Ange, we've had enough for Ange and all this. But the thing is, if we were playing badly, we went to Newcastle last year and played very badly and got absolutely turned over. I mean, it was humiliating. The year before was even worse. The year before that was Steve Bruce's last year. So we've suddenly been a bogey team. It's only the last 2 seasons. The year before that, we tore Newcastle apart at St James's. I was there. It was Steve Bruce's last game, but of course everything changed after that. I think if we were playing badly still, like we were towards the end of last season, and losing badly, I'd have a massive problem with Ange Ball. But we've started this season playing very, very well. We've added some good players. And don't forget, today, we were without a centre-forward. We've got 2 proper, fully fledged Premier League centre-forwards in the squad. They're both injured. And we were also without our irreplaceable centre-half in Van der Ven, who is the quickest guy. And the way we play, of course, we need that speed at the back. As we saw today, the high line out comes with risks. Yeah. And so we didn't have anyone putting the ball in the net. Our centre-forwards are out. We didn't have anyone covering at the back for the high line. Our fastest centre-back was out. When you take all that into account, you take into account the 3 great performances, I'm not yet ready to consign Ange Ball to the dustbin.
You know, I think for both of you, just take a few days break with this international break, and I don't think you've got too much to worry about. But of course, it's a high bar for both Newcastle and Spurs these days. Gents, as always, thank you very much indeed. Referees, they'll be blowing the whistle next.